Picture this. You're flying over a land where ancient forests stretch endlessly to jagged peaks, where icy rivers carve through valleys so remote they've never heard human footsteps. This is Tasmania, and it's practically empty. Here's what doesn't make sense. This island spans 68,400 square kilometers, nearly the size of Ireland or Sri Lanka. Yet, barely 500,000 people call it home. That's just 7 people per square kilometer. But here's the real mystery. Why does this emptiness exist right on Australia's doorstep? Across the Bass Strait, 26 million Australians pack into cities bursting at the seams: Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. Yet, in Tasmania, you can drive for hours through mist-shrouded wilderness without passing another soul. Ghost towns cling to windswept coasts. Valleys carved by ancient glaciers echo with silence. What forces created this paradox? What keeps one of the world's most beautiful places so impossibly underpopulated? The answer isn't what you think. This emptiness wasn't by accident. It was engineered by a collision of geography, history, and human choices that echo through centuries. Some forces are obvious: mountains that slice the island in half, rainforests too dense to penetrate, winds that howl off the Southern Ocean. Others run deeper: stories of violence, displacement, and decisions made in distant capitals that shaped every empty valley you see today. Did you know that half of Tasmania is protected wilderness, completely off limits to development? Or that the island's isolation, once its greatest defense, now makes every shipment, every flight, every dream of growth a logistical nightmare? Over the next few minutes, we're diving into Tasmania's haunting past and uncertain future. We'll uncover how colonization shattered ancient ways of life, how geography became both blessing and curse, and how modern economics turned emptiness into inevitability. But here's the question that will follow us through every ghost town and every silent forest. Is Tasmania's emptiness its greatest tragedy, or its most valuable gift? What would it take to change the fate of this land apart? So, as we trace the contours of a place that refuses to be tamed, remember this: every empty landscape tells a story, and Tasmania's story might be the most surprising of all. Imagine Tasmania 35,000 years ago. Aboriginal peoples arrive, becoming masters of a land that would soon become one of Earth's most isolated places. For nearly 12 millennia after rising seas severed the land bridge to Australia, around 11,700 years ago, these communities thrived in complete isolation. Picture their world. From alpine meadows in the Central Highlands to storm-battered coasts, Aboriginal Tasmanians crafted a life in perfect harmony with country. Their knowledge of fire, stone, and seasonal rhythms was woven into the very fabric of the island. Population estimates before European contact range from 3,000 to 7,000. Small, yes, but deeply rooted. Then, 1803 arrived like a thunderclap. British colonists, terrified of French expansion, established a penal outpost at Risdon Cove. What followed wasn't just colonization, it was a collision of worlds that would leave scars still visible today. The newcomers brought muskets, foreign laws, and something even deadlier: diseases like smallpox and influenza that swept through communities with no immunity. For Aboriginal Tasmanians, the consequences were catastrophic beyond imagination. Within 3 decades, violent frontier conflict erupted across the island. They called it the Black War. Martial law, forced removals, relentless pursuit that decimated entire clans. By 1835, Aboriginal population had collapsed to around 300 people, a genocide that echoes through generations. But Britain's plans for Tasmania went beyond settlement. This island was engineered as a prison state. From 1803 to 1853, thousands of convicts were transported to its shores. Penal stations like Port Arthur became infamous, their stone walls rising from the mist like monuments to human suffering. Convict labour carved roads through wilderness, built the bones of future towns. Yet, even as free settlers arrived, Tasmania's population never boomed like New South Wales or Victoria. The island carried too much weight, the trauma of violence, the stigma of exile, the isolation that kept opportunity at arm's length. Here's what's haunting. These century-old scars, they still shape Tasmania's empty map today. A society built on forced exile and extraction struggled to attract voluntary migrants. The land itself, wounded by dispossession, seemed to resist new growth. Can you feel how these shadows still stretch across every silent valley? How does a population devastated by colonial violence ever fully recover? Keep this question with you, because the answer shapes everything that follows. Step outside Hobart or Launceston, and Tasmania's wilderness hits you like a physical force. Mountains, jagged, snow-dusted, ancient, slice the island into isolated pockets that feel like separate worlds. Fully half of Tasmania is rugged highlands, with the Central Highlands and Western Tiers forming a spine as beautiful as it is forbidding. Consider Cradle Mountain, rising 1,545 meters, over 5,000 feet above sea level. In winter, these peaks lock themselves in frost and snow, reminding you that this land answers to cold, not comfort. Now picture the forests. Over 50% of Tasmania is reserved as protected wilderness. World Heritage rainforests, alpine tundra, coastlines battered by the world's cleanest winds. These reserves are Tasmania's crown jewels. They're also massive no-go zones for settlement or agriculture. Here's the stark reality: only 10% of Tasmania is actually farmable, clustered in precious valleys like the Coal River or along the northern coast. If you've ever wondered why towns are so sparse on the map, this is your answer. The land itself says not here. And then there's the water. The Bass Strait stretches 240 kilometres, 150 miles between Tasmania and mainland Australia, acting as a natural moat that's never been conquered. Crossing isn't simple. Ferries like the Spirit of Tasmania, they take 9 to 11 hours with only a handful of sailings each week. Flights are faster, but limited mostly to Hobart and Launceston, with far fewer daily options than any mainland state. For anyone moving goods or chasing opportunity, this separation is a constant tax. Freight costs run 30 to 40% higher than on the mainland. Every business decision, every life choice gets filtered through this geographic reality. Let's talk about something else that shapes everything: the weather. Tasmania's climate is cool and oceanic, a world apart from Australia's sun-baked reputation. Winters average just 5 to 12 degrees Celsius. That's 41 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, with Antarctic fronts bringing biting winds and sudden snowfalls. In deep winter, the sun barely manages 9 hours above the horizon, draping the landscape in perpetual twilight. For some, this is magical. For others, it's a test of endurance. Think about this. How does an environment like this shape not just where people live, but who chooses to stay? Would you stake your future on land that resists every attempt to tame it? Tasmania's fortress-like geography guards its beauty, but at what cost to its people? So, here we are. After tracing Tasmania's journey through ancient isolation, colonial trauma, and geographic barriers that seem destined to keep the world at bay, what have we discovered? Tasmania's emptiness, it isn't a flaw to be fixed. It's a story written in mountains and scars, shaped by forces both ancient and modern. This isn't just about numbers on a map. It's about what happens when nature, history, and human choices create something entirely unique. But step back for a moment. What if that emptiness, so often seen as Tasmania's curse, is actually its greatest asset? Where else in the developed world can you find half a state protected as pristine wilderness? Where else does the absence of urban sprawl mean clean air, unpolluted rivers, and space to build something genuinely new, instead of copying what came before? Imagine the possibilities: cool climate industries that thrive on space and science, green energy projects powered by fierce winds, digital nomads untethered from geography. Of course, transformation doesn't happen by accident. It requires vision, creative infrastructure that truly connects communities, digital networks that bridge the strait, migration policies that attract fresh skills and new energy. But just as vital is something harder to build: a collective willingness to rethink what growth looks like and who it serves. Here's the question that haunts every empty highway and silent forest. What if Tasmania leaned into its emptiness instead of fighting it? Could a place that historically resisted crowds become the world's model for balance between human ambition and planetary health? Or will the same forces that created this emptiness, distance, cost, isolation, keep Tasmania frozen in time while the world rushes past? As we leave behind the island's misty ridges and ghost towns, consider what emptiness means to you. Is it a problem demanding solutions, or an invitation to imagine something radically different? Tasmania sits at a crossroads, its future unwritten. The space between crowded cities and untouched wilderness, that's where Tasmania lives. That's where its story continues to unfold. So, here's my final question to you. What would you do with a place like this? Where does opportunity end and emptiness begin? The conversation doesn't stop here. It continues in every wild place that still has room to dream. What future would you write for the island that time forgot?